The notary said my name twice before I realized he wasn't addressing someone else. I'm Claire Maddox, and I was 41 years old the morning my life split cleanly in two, the part before that conference room and everything that came after. The room smelled like old paper and central heating, the kind of warmth that doesn't comfort so much as preserve. 7 of us sat around a mahogany table that was too large for the occasion. Me, my husband Marcus, his mother Donna, his sister Renata and her husband, a family friend named Gerald Price who had apparently been remembered in the will, and a paralegal who kept her eyes on her notepad throughout the entire proceeding, as though she had already decided not to witness what was happening. Raymond Maddox, my father-in-law, a man who had built his construction supply company from a single rented warehouse into a regional operation worth several $1,000,000, had died 11 weeks earlier from a stroke that came without warning on a Tuesday afternoon in October. He had been 71, vigorous by his own account, and he had loved me in the quiet, consistent way that certain men of his generation expressed love, by asking after my work, by always having decaf ready when I visited, by slipping Lily $20 every time he saw her and winking like it was a secret. The reading of the will had been delayed by what Donna described as administrative complications. I had not thought to question that phrase. I should have. The document the notary read from had been updated 14 months before Raymond died. The earlier version, the one Marcus had shown me on a winter evening 3 years prior, sitting at our kitchen table. A version in which my name appeared as co-beneficiary alongside Marcus for the residential property on Sycamore and a trust for Lily's education. That version was not the document being read aloud in that room. I understood this slowly. The way you understand something is wrong with your body before the pain arrives, a dull awareness, a shift in the quality of the air. When the notary reached the section detailing the residential property on Sycamore, the value listed was $340,000. And the beneficiary, sole and undivided, was Marcus Allen Maddox. My name was not there. I looked up from the papers in front of me. Donna was watching me from across the table. Not with guilt. Not with the careful neutrality of someone pretending not to notice. She was watching me with something that took me a moment to identify, because it was so unguarded, so plainly displayed, satisfaction. Her lips curved just slightly, like a comma inserted where a period should have been, and she looked back down at her copy of the document. Marcus was staring at the table. That was the moment, not the words, not the numbers, but his eyes fixed on the wood grain, the deliberate stillness of a man who had rehearsed exactly how he would sit in this chair on this morning, and had decided that he would not look at me. I had been married to him for 14 years. I had given up a partnership offer in Columbus to move to Ashford Falls for his family business. I had raised our daughter mostly alone through the years when his work demanded 60-hour weeks, and I had never once complained, because I had believed, completely, without reservation, that we were building something together. I set my copy of the document down on the table. I folded my hands in my lap. I did not cry, though something inside my chest cracked quietly, the way old plaster sounds when a house settles. I smiled at Donna across the table. And I began to think. To understand what happened in that conference room, I need to go back further than 14 months. I need to go back to the version of myself that existed before I learned that the most dangerous deceptions are the ones dressed in the clothing of ordinary life. Marcus and I had met at a design trade show in Cleveland. He was there representing Maddox Supply, looking for new contractor relationships, and I was there representing the small firm I worked for at the time, looking for material vendors. He was tall, direct, and funny in a dry, understated way that I found immediately attractive. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. I knew what I was choosing. A man with deep roots in a place I hadn't grown up in, a close family, a mother who had opinions about everything from Christmas menus to throw pillow placement. Donna had never been warm to me. I had spent 14 years telling myself that was simply her character, that she was reserved, that she showed love through criticism the way some people show it through food, that her sharpness was not specific to me. Marcus reinforced this interpretation every time I raised it. "That's just Mom," he would say, with a finality that functioned less as explanation and more as a door closing. Looking back now, I was choosing comfort over clarity every single time I accepted that answer. The first sign I genuinely missed or chose not to see came about 2 years after Raymond's stroke scare in 2019. A minor one, the doctors said, and Raymond had recovered well, but it had frightened everyone enough that estate conversations began happening. Marcus came home one evening and mentioned, in the way he mentioned things he considered settled, that his father was revising the will. "Just cleaning things up," he said, opening the refrigerator. I was helping Lily with a school project at the kitchen table. "Cleaning what up?" I asked. "Beneficiary language. Dad wants everything to flow properly." I nodded. I helped Lily cut a picture of the solar system from a magazine. I did not ask any follow-up questions because Marcus used that specific tone, efficient, slightly bored, to communicate that the topic was practical and uninteresting, and I had learned over the years to read his tonal signals and adjust accordingly. I hadn't put it together yet, but something inside had already registered the absence of my name in that sentence. The second sign came from my closest friend, Patrice Owens, whom I had known since Lily was in preschool. Patrice had been one of the first people I'd trusted in Ashford Falls. She was warm, sharp, perpetually cheerful, and she had spent years as a quiet buffer between me and the loneliness of being an outsider in a town where everyone else's roots went back generations. We had coffee every Thursday. We told each other everything. Or I thought we did. About 18 months before Raymond died, Patrice had begun spending more time with Donna. They had joined the same garden club, unremarkable on its face, since Ashford Falls was a small town where social circles overlapped constantly. But there were small things I noticed without registering their meaning, Patrice growing slightly evasive when I mentioned Donna, changing the subject with the smooth fluency of practice. A lunch the two of them had that Patrice mentioned only in passing, days after it had happened. The way Patrice began, subtly, to steer our conversations away from my concerns about Marcus's distance, offering instead reassurances that felt slightly too prepared. I didn't let myself name what I was sensing. I called it overthinking. I was good at that, at finding the most charitable interpretation of every signal and then insisting on it. Marcus's emotional distance in the last 2 years of Raymond's life was something I attributed to work stress. He had been managing the company's expansion into Pennsylvania, a venture that consumed him in ways that felt legitimate. He worked late. He was quieter at dinner. He stopped asking about my projects with the genuine curiosity he'd shown when we first married. I told myself this was a phase, that we were in that particular stretch of marriage that tests couples not through drama but through erosion, and that we would find our way back to each other. In the evenings, after Lily was in bed, I would sit in my home office working on client proposals, and I could hear Marcus on the phone in the bedroom. Not the words, just the cadence. And I remember thinking once, very distinctly, that his voice on those calls had a different quality from his voice when he spoke to me. Lighter. More animated. I didn't let myself wonder whose voice that was. The house on Sycamore, Raymond's residential property, had been part of family conversations for years. It was a beautiful mid-century structure on a quiet street, and Raymond had always spoken of it as something that would eventually pass to Marcus and me, partly as investment and partly as a connection to the family. I had even begun, in a private, unprofessional way I would never share with clients, to think about how I would restore it. The window placement, the floors, the original ironwork on the staircase. I had been designing a life inside a document that someone had already changed without telling me. Raymond died on a Thursday in October, and the small cracks that had been forming in my understanding of my life began to widen into something I couldn't plaster over with good faith. The delay in the will reading was the first thing that made me uneasy in a way I could no longer suppress. Donna controlled the timeline, and her explanation, "The estate attorney is managing some technical language," struck me as oddly vague for a woman who had been a professional accountant for 30 years and who had never in my experience left a practical matter to vague language. But I was grieving Raymond, who had been genuinely kind to me, and Marcus deflected every question I asked about the timing with the same half-present, mildly impatient expression he had adopted in the last year as his default response to me. I began paying closer attention. I noticed that when I asked Marcus about the estate directly, straightforward questions, Things a spouse of 14 years had every right to ask. He would answer in a way that satisfied the surface of the question while revealing nothing. Everything's being handled. The attorney has all the paperwork. It's complicated, Claire. Can we not do this tonight? Each response was grammatically complete and informationally empty, and I had spent enough years in rooms with clients who didn't want to tell me their budget to recognize the technique. Something shifted inside me. I couldn't name it precisely, but it had a temperature, cool, settling, the opposite of panic. I started, very quietly, to look. I went through Marcus's home filing cabinet, something I had full access to, had always had access to, and had simply never done methodically before, on a Sunday afternoon in November while he was at the office and Lily was at a birthday party. I told myself I was organizing. That was partly true. The cabinet held what you'd expect: insurance documents, car titles, tax returns going back a decade. And in a green hanging folder labeled Raymond Estate, I found a photocopy of the original will. The version Marcus had shown me at the kitchen table 3 years earlier. My name was there, exactly as I remembered: co-beneficiary on the Sycamore property, joint trustee on Lily's educational trust. I photographed every page with my phone. My hands were completely steady. That surprised me. I called it a coincidence then, finding the copy, feeling the arithmetic of its presence, but I wouldn't call it that anymore. What I found in that folder was a record of what had existed before someone decided it shouldn't. The next piece arrived through Patrice, indirectly and entirely without her meaning it to. We were having coffee in mid-November, 3 weeks before the will reading, and Patrice mentioned, in that light, glancing way she had developed for subjects she was navigating carefully, that Donna had been so stressed about getting everything sorted before the holidays. The specificity of that phrase caught in me like a fishhook. Sorted. As if the estate were a closet being reorganized rather than a legal document establishing the distribution of a dead man's assets. Has Donna talked to you about the estate? I asked. Patrice's coffee cup paused a half-inch from her lips. Not dramatically, just a fraction of a second longer than the physics of the gesture required. Just in passing, she said. You know how she is. Everything's a project. I smiled. I said yes, I knew how she was. I did not sleep that night. I began to think about the timing of the will revision. Marcus had mentioned it in a tone designed to convey routine, but the date he'd referenced, I thought back, parsing the conversation with new precision, placed it about 8 weeks after Raymond's stroke scare. When Raymond was frightened. When Raymond was, perhaps, susceptible to reassurance from his wife of 43 years, who had been a professional accountant and who would have known exactly how to structure a conversation about protecting the family's assets. I wondered if my name had been removed, or if it had been prevented from being added. I wondered if Raymond had known. The detail that had seemed insignificant at the time, Marcus staring at the table during that kitchen conversation, wasn't insignificant. He had already known. He had been presenting me with a fait accompli dressed as information. I still remember exactly what that felt like, turning that over in my mind in the dark while Marcus slept beside me. Not rage. Something quieter and more dangerous. The specific clarity that arrives when you finally let yourself see what you have been carefully not looking at. I am an interior designer. My entire professional life is built on the discipline of seeing what is actually in a room rather than what a client imagines is there, and then documenting it precisely before proposing anything. I applied that discipline to the next 4 weeks of my life. I did not confront Marcus. I did not call Donna. I did not tell Patrice what I suspected. I went to work every morning, made Lily's lunches, attended the school winter concert, and in the hours between, I built a file. The first call I made was to an estate attorney, not the family's attorney, not anyone connected to Ashford Falls social circles, but a woman named Sylvia Crane in Columbus, whose name I found through a bar association directory. I told her I needed a consultation about a will I believed had been altered under undue influence. I did not use our family name. I used my maiden name, which I had never legally given up, a small act of self-preservation I had insisted on at the time of our marriage that Marcus had found slightly baffling and had eventually accepted. Sylvia Crane listened for 40 minutes without interrupting. Then she told me what she needed. I obtained Raymond's original will through the probate court, public record. available to anyone who requested it, and brought it to Columbus on a Wednesday, telling Marcus I had a client meeting. The original filing predated the revision by 4 years. It matched the photocopy I'd found in our filing cabinet, my name, Lily's trust, co-beneficiary language throughout. Sylvia studied both documents and asked me several questions about Raymond's mental state in the 18 months following his stroke scare. She used the phrase capacity and undue influence with the focused precision of someone who had said it many times before in exactly these circumstances. The financial piece came to me through a source I hadn't anticipated. Marcus and I had a joint checking account for household expenses, and I had always had full online access. In December, reviewing the account for a different reason entirely, I was preparing our end-of-year charitable giving summary. Something I had done every year, I noticed a series of transfers I hadn't seen before. Not large amounts. Not dramatic. For transfers between $800 and $1,200, made on different dates over the previous 7 months, all to an account number I didn't recognize. The memo lines were blank. I photographed the screen. I sent the images to a personal email account I had created 3 weeks earlier on a device Donna had given Lily for her birthday, a tablet that lived in Lily's room and that no one else used. I had spent years being good at the wrong things, at keeping the peace, at not asking, at making everything look fine from the outside. This was the first time in 14 years I had directed that same patient, detail-oriented energy toward protecting myself. The transfers were not evidence of the will revision on their own, but they were evidence of a financial relationship between Marcus and an account I had no knowledge of, maintained secretly over a sustained period. Sylvia told me that in combination with the will revision, the timing, and the absence of any conversation with me about the change, it formed a pattern worth examining. The piece I needed, and the piece I almost missed, came from Renata. Marcus's sister was not part of the conspiracy, a fact I had spent weeks uncertain about. She was self-contained, private, living in Pittsburgh with her husband and managing her own relationship with the Maddox family legacy from a distance. We were not close. But at Raymond's memorial service, standing near the refreshment table, she had said something to me quietly that I had filed away without processing. "I hope you're not surprised by anything in the will, Claire." I told Marcus 2 years ago this wasn't right. I had attributed it, at the time, to some sibling dispute about her own share of the estate. In December, I called Renata. I told her what I had found. There was a silence on the phone that lasted long enough for me to wonder if I had misjudged everything. Then she said, Mother had Dad sign a codicil 9 days after his first stroke scare. I found out from the attorney's assistant, a woman I went to high school with. I confronted Marcus, and he told me it was a simplification of language. I should have pushed harder. She emailed me a name, the attorney's assistant, who had since left the practice and was no longer bound by any confidentiality to the firm. Her name was Linda Ferris, and she lived in Dayton, and she remembered the afternoon Donna Maddox had brought Raymond in to sign the revised document. She remembered it because Raymond had asked her, while Donna was speaking to the attorney in the hallway, whether the changes would be fair to Claire. Linda had assumed Claire was a business associate and had said she didn't know. Raymond had nodded and signed. He had asked. That was the detail that lived inside me like a splinter. Raymond, frightened after his stroke, asking a stranger whether his wife's machinations would be fair to me, receiving no answer, and signing anyway because Donna had been in the hallway managing the attorney and Raymond had spent 43 years trusting her management of everything. I didn't ask myself whether I was angry at him. I knew the answer would complicate things I needed to keep clear. I cried in my car in a parking lot in Dayton for approximately 8 minutes, and then I drove home and made dinner and helped Lily practice her spelling words. I also, in that same week, confirmed what I had suspected about Patrice. I did not confront her either. I simply tested her. I told her, in a confiding tone, something false, that I had decided not to pursue any legal action regarding the estate, that I was going to accept the situation and focus on my marriage. I watched her face carefully. The relief that moved across it was too specific, too complete, to belong to a friend who simply wanted peace for me. Within 48 hours, Marcus became noticeably warmer, almost cautious in his kindness, the way people behave when they believe a threat has been neutralized. He suggested we take Lily on a weekend trip. He asked about my work with genuine interest for the first time in months. Patrice had told him what I'd said. I had spent years inside a web of people who had decided, quietly and collectively, that I was someone to be managed. The morning I understood that, completely sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee while Lily ate breakfast and Marcus was in the shower, I felt something leave me. Not hope, exactly. Not love. A certain kind of softness that I had confused, for a long time, with trust. The will reading was December 18th. I had known for 3 weeks exactly what I would find in that room, and I had spent those 3 weeks finishing what I needed to finish. Sylvia Crane had filed a formal legal challenge to the codicil on the grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity, timed to coincide with the conclusion of the will reading, not before, because I needed Donna and Marcus to believe, until the last possible moment, that I knew nothing. I had given Linda Ferris's contact information to Sylvia. I had provided the financial transfer records to Sylvia. I had given Sylvia Renata's account of the conversation with Marcus, which Renata had put in a signed written statement. I had provided the probate records, the original will, the photocopy from our filing cabinet. I had also, 3 days before the reading, moved the sum equivalent to my annual design income from our joint account into a personal account in my name alone, on the advice of Sylvia, who told me to do it without drama and without announcement. I said nothing to Marcus. I said nothing to Donna. I dressed carefully that morning, a charcoal wool dress I had bought for client presentations, serious and precise. And I drove to the notary's office and I sat in that conference room and I listened to Raymond's estate being distributed according to a document his wife had arranged for him to sign 9 days after a medical event that had frightened him badly enough to ask a stranger whether it was fair. When the notary reached the section about the Sycamore property and read Marcus's name alone, I looked at Donna. She looked back at me with that small, comma-shaped smile. And I reached into my bag and placed Sylvia Crane's card on the table. My attorney filed a challenge to the codicil this morning, I said. My voice was steady. The grounds are undue influence and diminished capacity. The court has a copy of Raymond's original will, a signed statement from the attorney's former assistant describing the circumstances of the signing, and financial records I believe will be relevant to establishing a pattern of concealment. The room was absolutely quiet. Marcus turned to look at me for the first time that morning. His face had the specific blankness of a person whose interior architecture has suddenly shifted and left nothing in place yet to replace it. Donna's smile was gone. In its place was something I had not expected to see, not fury, not denial, but a kind of collapse, the expression of someone who has been building something very carefully for a very long time and has just watched it tilt. She said, "Claire, I'm not going to discuss it here," I said. "Sylvia will be in contact with the estate attorney." I looked at Renata, who was watching me from her side of the table with an expression I can only describe as exhausted relief. I nodded at her. She nodded back. I stood up, gathered my bag, and left. Marcus followed me into the hallway. I heard him call my name twice. I walked to the elevator. The doors opened and I stepped in and turned around, and he was standing 10 feet away, his coat still in his hand, and he looked for just a moment, briefly and completely, like the man I had married. Not the man I had been married to. The one from before. There was something in his face that might have been genuine grief, genuine regret, the recognition of a man who had allowed something irreplaceable to be destroyed because he had never once chosen me over his mother's approval. I understood then something I had been circling for years, that the man I had loved had never fully existed separately from Donna. That what I had been trying to salvage, a marriage, a partnership, a life built on honest ground, had always been, at its center, an arrangement in which I was an addition to Donna's plan rather than a participant in my own. That knowledge didn't feel like relief. It felt like setting down something very heavy you'd been carrying so long you'd stopped noticing the weight. The elevator doors closed. The legal process took 7 months. Sylvia was thorough and unhurried in the particular way that good attorneys are unhurried, not because they lack urgency, but because they understand that precision takes the time it takes. The challenge to the codicil proceeded through Ohio's probate court with the evidence I had gathered, supplemented by a neuropsychological review of Raymond's medical records from the period of signing. The reviewing doctor concluded that while Raymond had not lacked capacity entirely, the documentation showed sufficient evidence of elevated anxiety, disorientation in complex decision-making, and reliance on Donna's guidance to support an argument of undue influence. The estate's family attorney settled rather than litigate. The settlement reinstated the original will's co-beneficiary language in full, the Sycamore property, the educational trust for Lily, every item that had been quietly excised 14 months before Raymond died. Donna did not speak to me after the conference room. She communicated through her attorney and, I was told by Renata, through a sustained campaign of outrage directed at anyone in Ashford Falls who would listen. She framed it as her daughter-in-law's greed, her daughter-in-law's vindictiveness, her daughter-in-law's failure to respect what family meant. Several people in town believed her. Several did not. I stopped caring about the distinction sometime in March, when I realized that a life organized around managing other people's perceptions of you is not actually a life. Marcus and I separated in January, 2 weeks after the will reading. He moved into an apartment. He called several times in the first month with variations on the same theme, that he had been caught in the middle, that he had told his mother from the beginning that it wasn't right, that he had never truly wanted this. Each call was structurally similar to the conversations I had with clients who had made design decisions they regretted, a lot of passive framing, a great deal of emphasis on forces beyond their control, very little acknowledgement that they had made a choice. I listened to each call. I was not unkind. And I did not change my decision. The divorce was finalized in August. Lily was 9 and she was, as 9-year-olds are, both more and less resilient than I feared. She asked me once, with the directness children reserve for questions they've been sitting with for a long time, "Did Daddy know they were taking something from you?" I told her yes. I told her that sometimes people we love make choices that hurt us, and that understanding why doesn't mean we have to accept it. She thought about this for a moment and then asked if we could have pancakes. We had pancakes. I sold the Sycamore property in September. I had spent years imagining what I would do with those original floors, that ironwork staircase. In the end, I sold it to a young couple from Columbus who were moving to Ashford Falls for exactly the reasons I had moved there 14 years earlier: roots, proximity to family, the idea of building something in a place with history. I wished them genuinely well. The proceeds went into an account for Lily and into the foundation of a studio I opened on Main Street, small, precise, exactly the kind of space I had always wanted and had somehow spent 14 years postponing. Patrice called me once, in February, and I let the call go to voicemail. Her message was long and tearful and contained several iterations of "I didn't think it would go this far," and "I was in an impossible position," which are the things people say when they mean, "I made a choice, and I hoped you would never find out." I didn't return the call. Some relationships are worth repairing, and some represent a version of yourself you no longer need to protect. I understood the difference now with a clarity I hadn't had before. By the time the leaves came back in April, I had a studio, a settled legal case, a daughter who knew she was loved, and a life that was smaller than I'd planned and more honest than I'd had in years. I was not happy in any triumphant sense. I was something quieter and more durable than that. I still think about Raymond sometimes. About him sitting in that attorney's office, frightened after his stroke, asking whether it would be fair to Claire. I hope he knew somewhere that I would not simply accept it. I hoped that the version of him that had always had decaf ready for me, that had winked at Lily and pressed $20 into her palm, the version that asked strangers whether his wife's decisions were right, I hoped that version of him found some peace. I found mine slowly, the way things that matter usually arrive, not in a moment, but in accumulated ordinary days, each one a little more genuinely mine than the one before. What this story ultimately reveals is not about wills, or inheritance, or even betrayal in its most dramatic form. It is about something quieter and more pervasive, the slow domestication of a person's instincts. Claire was not a naive woman. She was perceptive, professionally rigorous, emotionally attuned. Yet, she spent 14 years in a household where her perceptions were consistently redirected by Marcus's bored deflections, by Donna's social control, by Patrice's calibrated friendship, until she had developed a reflex of self-correction that functioned almost automatically. Every time something registered as wrong, she found the more charitable interpretation and chose it. Not out of weakness. Out of a survival strategy she had built so carefully over so many years that she had stopped recognizing it as a strategy at all. The real crime committed against Claire was not the codicil. The codicil was the transaction. The real crime was the 14-year project of making her doubt her own reading of the room, so that when the moment of exposure arrived, those responsible could reasonably expect she would do what she had always done: absorb the discomfort, recalibrate toward acceptance, and say nothing. What they miscalculated was the nature of her professional eye. The same systematic attention she brought to documenting a room's honest dimensions, not what a client wanted to see, but what was actually there, she eventually turned on her own life. And once that attention was fully deployed, it was methodical and thorough in a way that a more impulsive person's anger would not have been. She didn't explode. She documented. The question worth sitting with is what enabled the conspiracy to function for as long as it did, and the answer is not that the conspirators were clever, but that they understood exactly which of Claire's values to exploit. Her loyalty. Her commitment to the marriage. Her belief that drama was a failure mode. Her deep, almost constitutional resistance to conflict. Donna did not need Claire to be stupid. She only needed Claire to be, as she had always been, the kind of person who absorbed tension rather than generating it. That impulse, the one that says not tonight, not this, let it go, is not a character flaw. It is often what holds a household together, what makes a marriage survivable through its difficult years, what allows children to grow up in a relatively stable environment. The tragedy is when that same impulse is recognized and deliberately exploited by someone who understands its function and has decided that it is not a bridge but a door to walk through. Donna understood it. Marcus, whether he was its architect or its beneficiary, allowed it. Patrice, who had spent years watching Claire absorb and adjust, finally chose the side of the people she feared more. Each of them made a choice. And each choice was made possible by the one before it, in a chain that stretched back years, built link by link from moments that were individually small enough to dismiss. What Claire's story teaches, not as moral instruction, but as the plain logic of what happened, is that the relationships that damage us most are rarely the ones that arrive with clear warning. They are the ones that begin with genuine warmth, that accumulate slowly into architecture around us, and that by the time they reveal their true structure, we are already living inside them and have to choose, with full knowledge of the cost, whether to walk out. She chose to walk out. Not in anger, not in triumph, but with the same quiet precision she brought to everything else she did. And what was waiting on the other side was not the life she had planned. It was something she had not planned at all, which turned out to be the first genuinely hers. What stays with me, thinking about this story, is the moment Claire sat at the kitchen table after confirming Patrice's betrayal, the pancakes, the coffee, Lily eating breakfast, Marcus in the shower, and felt that something leave her. Not love. Not hope. A softness she had confused with trust. I think most of us have that softness. We needed to stay in relationships, to choose generosity over suspicion, to give people the benefit of the doubt for the 100th time. The question the story leaves with me is not whether that softness is a weakness. It isn't. It's one of the better parts of being human. The question is, who deserves it? Because the people who exploited Claire's generosity did not earn it, they simply recognized it and used it. And she, for 14 years, gave it to them anyway. That's not stupidity. That's love in the wrong direction. The hardest thing isn't leaving. The hardest thing is realizing that you stayed, not because you were deceived at every moment, but because some part of you already knew and kept choosing hope over honesty, because the alternative was a grief you didn't feel ready to survive. She survived it.